Okay, what's up, my nerds? Here we go. Second part of Unit 4. We're going to look at regulating the monopolies that we introduced in 4.1. So, good news is no new graphs, not many new rules, a couple things we're going to look at, but we're just kind of continuing on with the monopolies. So, let's talk about why we would want to regulate. Well, as we mentioned in 4.1, the monopolies that we're talking about are natural monopolies. In other words, those are monopolies that are taking place in the United States that are legal, but they're legal because the government is going in and basically saying you can't overcharge for this product, you can't underproduce for this product, and whatever the case may be. Okay, so why would the government want to regulate a monopoly? One, they want to keep the prices low, that we just talked about, and two, they want to make monopolies efficient. And they really only want to make them one type of efficient, which is allocative efficiency, which means that they're getting electric power to the people that need it, and not necessarily productively efficient. And we'll look at that on the graph. So how do they regulate? Well, they do it through price ceiling, something that we know about from Unit 2. And so they basically go in and say you can't charge above this price. Okay, and so we're going to take a look here in just a minute at the graphs and see what that looks like. But before we do, I want to talk about taxes real quick. So why would taxes not work in this situation? Why could a government not go in and tax a business to get them to do what they want to do? Well, here's what we know about taxes, and here's why that doesn't work. Taxes causes an issue with supply, right? Taxes are putting a limit on supply by cutting into the profit, and then businesses don't want to produce as much. And so then we run into the next problem, right? If you limit the supply, then that really didn't accomplish making them allocatively efficient. All right? So where should the government, if we're talking about our graphs here, where should the government place the price ceiling? Well, they can do it in one of two places. One, they can put it at the socially optimal price, okay? Which means where price equals marginal costs are technically where equilibrium would be, okay? So, and we'll look at that on the graph here in just a second. Or the second place that they can put it is at a fair return price, okay? There's a problem with putting it at the socially optimal price, and we'll see that on the graph in a minute, because then a monopoly may not make any money, and then that's a whole nother issue. Because what if you put the power company out of business? Then when none of us have power, so they can't do that. But they can say, okay, well, here's what we'll let you do. We will allow you to charge a price that puts you at a break-even point, which we all know is zero profit or zero normal profit, but is a positive accounting profit. So they still would be making money, but economically would not. So anyway, those are the two places. And just so we know, the second one is where price equals the ATC. Okay, and we'll look at that on a graph here in a second. In other words, that's at a normal profit. That's where we would see, if we could technically say a monopoly in the long run, right? Then that would be putting them at a normal profit. So anyway, let's take a look and see what that looks like. So if we're looking here at a natural monopoly, we'll say that this is our power company or whatever the case may be, and we see a price here where marginal cost intersects demand, right? We know that marginal cost curve is our supply curve, so that is technically where society wants that particular business to produce, okay? Why would they want to do that? Because one firm can produce this at the lowest cost because of economies of scale. If there was competition, or if there were another business having to reduce cost, then we're talking about the price going up from there. So just like we talked about before, the reason that there's even a natural monopoly is because it's better to have one power company producing the power. All right. So we looked at one end of that. We know where the socially optimal quantity is. We know where society wants it. Well, what if it went unregulated? Well, we looked at that in 4.1. 4.1 was technically an unregulated monopoly. In other words, that is where MR equals MC right here, charging up to this particular price. And we even said the problem with that is that a monopoly that is unregulated produces too little quantity, right? And they charge too high of a price. All right, and so that's the two issues. So we could either ask them to produce what society wants, which in this particular scenario we notice if that's their ATC, then they're actually making a loss. Could be a problem. And then if we unregulate them, then they don't make enough. They don't make what society wants. If a power company went unregulated and charged the price that they wanted to for power, many of us may go without power because we can't afford it. So those are the two others. So the third, or really the second place that it could be regulated, but the third option here is the fair return. All right, we said that fair return was at the minimum ATC, right? And this would be zero economic profit. Okay, this would be what a monopoly technically would look like in the long run. All right, although they don't follow the same rules as short run and long run that competition does, because they're price makers, they're not price takers. So anyway, what you need to get from this particular lesson and what you need to kind of practice on are the different places that a monopoly could price. Okay, unregulated, fair return, meaning the government is allowing them to make no economic profit, or the socially optimal quantity, which would put them in a position where they are possibly losing money. All right, we're going to talk about that because that does exist, believe it or not. Like I could see how unregulated. I could see how unregulated would exist. I could see how fair return would exist. That's how our power companies exist. But what instance would this socially optimal, no deadweight loss, meaning there's no loss consumer or producer surplus, in what business would that technically take place? Well, if you've ever heard of Amtrak, Amtrak is a train service that runs from some major cities. The government actually subsidizes Amtrak to stay in business. In other words, Amtrak doesn't charge enough money to even make a fair return or even make zero economic profit. All right, and so the government knows that Amtrak is necessary, knows that without Amtrak it would lead to higher gas prices, it would lead to higher plane ticket prices, and that us as citizens, society needs this added transportation. So they basically say, okay, we're going to help you stay in business by subsidizing. Okay, and so what happens if the government sets a price ceiling to get the socially optimal quantity? Okay, this is Amtrak. How do we make sure that American citizens, well, we put them in a position like this where they are going to produce where MC equals demand, or technically supply and demand cross equilibrium. But the problem here, as you guys can see, they're not making an economic profit. So if that is the case, the firm would make a loss and would require a government subsidy, okay, which is what happens in the case of Amtrak.